Picture yourself sitting at the end of a super long banquet table. Let's say this table is as long as the Great Hall. And as you peer down to the other end of the table, different types of food start to appear. Now, this isn't just random food. It's all the food that you have decided at some point in your life that you love. Now, I realize that some of us have extensive palates. So your table might have hundreds of different types of food on it. I also realize that some of our tables might consist of chicken fingers and pizza. Regardless, the table in front of you is laid out with mouth-watering food. However, as you scan the delicious oasis filled with your own personal delicacies, your eyes land on the one food that you could never live without. This is the food that if you were stranded on a desert island, you could eat for the rest of your life. For my son, this would be Cool Ranch Doritos. When I was around 8 years old, though, my favorite thing to eat was nerd candy. They come in this cool box that you can open a small corner of, and you can just pour these little guys in your mouth. I loved them. As a matter of fact, my dad would always joke around with me and tell me that I was going to turn into a nerd. Playing off the old adage that you are what you eat. Obviously, this transformation didn't happen to the extent I desired. But in a way, this is a true statement. You are what you eat. The food you ingest instructs the way your body operates. The way your body feels often correlates directly with whatever you fuel it with. In other words, garbage in, garbage out. Quality in, quality out. Now, typically, this is a lesson for the older, wiser people in the room. When we realize that the nerd candy we ate as a kid has a different effect on our bodies now. This is why I switched from nerds to smart water. Hopefully this one comes to fruition. However, with this in mind, does your focus change when you look at the banquet table? Do you start to look for something that is better for you? In our gospel reading this morning, Jesus is confronted by the Pharisees and the scribes. I know, shocking. This time they are confronting Jesus on the subject of hygiene. Washing your hands before you eat, always a good idea. However, they were concerned with ritual hygiene. The ritual of washing your hands was to wash away that which defiles you. So if you didn't wash, your hands were defiled, and therefore the food you touched was also defiled. And this was a tradition passed down by the elders, and some of the disciples haven't washed their hands. This reminds me of when we lived in Georgia, and Liz and I went out to eat with one of our favorite families, the Banquets. And at the time, their son was about 5 years old, and his dad had taken him to the restroom. And as they were coming out of the restroom, the 5-year-old pointed at a gentleman that had come out just before them and announced to the whole restaurant that this guy didn't wash his hands! Out of the mouths of babes. The Pharisees and the scribes, much like our 5-year-old friend, asked Jesus why his disciples were eating with defiled hands. And Jesus' response is twofold. First, he does warrant their question with a response. And Jesus' response is straight from the prophet Isaiah, which to these men, the Pharisees and the scribes, they would have been intimately familiar. You teach the doctrine of men and abandon the commandment of God. Secondly, Jesus then turns away from the Pharisees and the scribes to teach the people that have gathered around. He physically turns away from the doctrine of men and begins to teach the people about what really defiles them. What really defiles someone isn't determined by what's going on outside of you. Rather, it is what comes out of you that defiles you. It's what comes out, it's what comes from your heart that makes you who and whose you are. We are now sitting back at the head of our banquet table. Surprisingly, the table has gotten infinitely longer. Because this time, the table isn't prepared with delicious food for our bellies. Instead, the table is populated with other substances that we consume. As you look out over your table, you see things like the movies you watch, TV shows, books, magazines, and an array of social media platforms. You see the whole world at your fingertips. Now, I know you might be thinking, well, that's cool, because Jesus said in our gospel reading that what is going on outside of us doesn't defile us. Now, I'm not one to argue with Jesus, so I'm not going to. As long as you keep the world on the table, it's all good. However, that's not where those things stay, is it? We all consume with our eyes and ears the things the world has to offer us. We take this information and create man-made doctrines to live by that influence the ways we take in, process, and live our lives. We take these man-made doctrines and allow them to shape our hearts, therefore allowing them to dictate how we respond to God and how we respond to one another. Now, there is a litmus test that we can take to see what shape our hearts are in. There is a way to self-evaluate if we are consuming quality or garbage. We can look to our epistle reading from James this morning, verses 19 to 21. You must understand this, my beloved. Let everyone be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to anger. For your anger does not produce God's righteousness. Therefore, rid yourselves of all sordidness and rank growth of wickedness, and welcome with meekness the implanted word that has the power to save your souls. Is what I'm consuming bolstering an attitude that resembles the love that God pours out on me? Could my actions or reactions towards others be perceived as damning or merciless? Can we all agree, just like in the case of what we eat affects our bodies, What we consume that fills our hearts and minds affects our actions, affects what we believe and don't believe. Now, after we have all taken the litmus test, picture yourself sitting yet again at the really long banquet table. Again, the table is covered with all the world has to offer you. Well, as you look around this time, I want you to notice where Jesus is sitting at your table. Can you see him? Maybe if we squint really hard, we can see him sitting at the other end of the table. And he's saying something. However, over all the noise laid on the table, you can't hear it. The good news is that neither your feet nor your chair are nailed to the ground. Get up, grab your chair, and make the journey to sit next to Jesus. Now, when you make this move, you do lose the place of honor at the head of the table. But that's okay. Because as you get closer and closer to Jesus, you will notice that the world begins to be filtered through God himself. You will start to consume and fill your heart with that which cleanses you. That which begins to make you holy. Because you are moving to take a seat next to the one who is the true head of the banquet. The one who gave his life for you. The one who is making all things new. Jesus Christ.